All right, this is another episode, Two Kings Challenge. I'm Frank McFarland. I'm here with the expert Brian King, who gosh, we did not put a lot of thought into what today's show would be about in terms of our topic, but it has been a frustrating week for me. I think it's probably the best way to describe it.
Well, good morning, Frank. You're up in a different office. I'm here at HQ today, and it really has been quite a challenge of that you would anticipate when you're opening up a new business. I think that the energy level that we started this thing out with, of course, is going to be channeled into, okay, what's that action plan going to look like? I think that today I talk a little bit about what we consider the building blocks of an office, and the order that we put that together, and some of the things that we would do. But one of the things I think that really is a challenge is, we're going into two places where our brand is not known. That we're going in to two locations where there are established competitors in the market that we know we have a relationship with, but at the same time, the strength of our brand has always been a small town, like bringing big city services to the small towns, taking that same process and putting into larger metropolis type areas for us that Charlotte and Asheville represent. Is going to be a challenge. But I think that for you, some of the challenges has been that you wanted to start this off with some new level marketing. And when you get into a world of new marketing, where you're doing a lot of beta testing and checking, and at the same time, and trying to put this together in a short time frame, it can be frustrating. So talk a little bit about where your frustrations are. I think that any new business owner is going to have that. And I think it's something that anybody listening to this can relate to.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a number of different levels, of frustration. You have your own ability to do things and what you do with that. And then obviously that may not always mesh with what the other people that you trust to build with are doing, and the directions that they're moving. So occasionally, there's going to be a little bit of rub there, which we have. It's not wrong. There are issues that we really have in these markets that we've traditionally had, and that brings with it some reluctance to do certain things in terms of resources and time and what we want to put into it. And then, obviously you deal with, there are personnel issues that come up and things that happen, and you want to have all of these pieces in place, but those things come with a price tag, and one that has to be supported by what your growth looks like, at that point. So that's a little bit of the challenge. And then kind of like, if you break that down a little bit more, one of the hardest things for me is it was really easy to get motivated on this thing early and to be real high energy about it. It's been a lot harder when, so let's just rewind back some. Okay. We talked about, one of the episodes I talked about a lot of the interviews that I had requested, that I reached out, got some pretty good responses from people. I can't tell you how many of those have been rescheduled or canceled or, have not happened. There have been setbacks there. We have had, we talked last week about TikTok, which has been great. It's been a good way to keep the energy levels up. But then, there's some staleness that happens with that too. And if you don't continue to see that crazy growth that you see early on, that becomes frustrating too. It hasn't been, last week we came into this and it was just, all positive. We're skyrocketing on views, a lot of positive things happen. And this week it's kind of leveled off more. So that's another part that factors in, and, part of the issue. And then, even with all of those parts, like, it's easy to get down, it's easy to lose motivation. But, I think what I have lost sight of a little bit, and it took one thing, and I'll talk a little bit more about it in a little bit. It took one thing to kind of make it more, to reel it back in and put this perspective on what that actually has. Because, really, regardless of what happens in Charlotte or what happens in Asheville, we have had a lot of high level discussion about, what our model is, how do we know when growth should happen? How do we know where growth should happen? Who are the right people for those things? And how do we know who the right people for those things are? And I know, we had a fantastic meeting last Friday that went through a lot of, not office specific things, but we were able to break down a lot of, kind of office wide issues that were there. And one of the things, and like I said, one of the things that kind of helped reel that back in for me was yesterday. Out of the blue on my calendar, I had a Charlotte appointment. Just so happened that client retained, and it just felt like, okay, there's a spark. All right, this is not, may have been completely unrelated to anything and everything that we have done from here, from the start of this thing to now. But for me, it was just that kind of confirmation that, regardless of whether, Charlotte is a $10 million office or a non-existent office in the future, the key is, where is our growth, and then figuring out what does and doesn't work. And I'm not giving up on Charlotte. I don't want, to come off that way. But you do kind of find, you find some beauty in the collateral on these things if you look for it. And I think that's where, part of what having that retained yesterday helped kind of reel in for me.
Well, I think it's so important to know, because whenever you start an endeavor, business or otherwise, the ups and downs are just so severe, because all you're looking at is trends. And one good day or one good client can send you up, and then one what you would consider a failed TikTok, like, why has this thing only got 100 views 8 hours in, or whatever it is, will make you feel like, oh well, this is just not working. I think that it's interesting for us, and what's really got our juices flowing when it comes to this kind of challenge is that we're working from King Law offices that's been around for 20 years, and I remember those early days, and you have been certainly part of growth, substantial growth since the time that you've come in. But for the most part, we became a much more mature business. I mean, the ups, we felt like, hey, here's where the ups are, here's where the downs are, and you can kind of find a tunnel that you're going in. And I think that we've been on a really steady incline, and it really kind of energized us to say, like, hey, what if we take that back and put this back at that bottom rung? And I don't think I remembered what it was like 20 years ago of those ups and downs. But this week has had some pretty huge ups for me. I thought that there was a chance of this last week. It's hard to believe, because we're doing this each week, and a week can feel like a year in a new business. I forgot that part of it. But I was able to introduce Jeannie Eubanks to the team, which is kind of ironic for me, because we've been working together, I think, for 16 years. So to introduce her as being somebody new, I kind of chuckle. She's got over 20 years of experience in law firms. Most of that is working directly with me. So there couldn't be a better piece as a case manager, and that's what we call our paralegals here, to be a foundation piece for that Asheville office. She had vacillated on a lot of things and has decided to start that. And I think in about 3 weeks, that's going to be her full time. It's making some adjustments for us overall at the firm. But as far as this Asheville one, what it does is it moves you know, when if you're thinking of a chessboard, you're talking about sliding your queen over to this area. I mean, this is now you know, a top tier. Hey, this is going to happen. Same time, I had some setbacks. Did get turned down for what I would, you know, in my envision is I wanted to kind of the grizzled veteran and a new upstart kind of attorney. And I certainly had that with Victoria. Jeannie, Victoria Corey, who's going to be our young attorney, is going to take over family law for Asheville. So, you know, I felt much better having Jeannie with the young person. So I was looking for that. Unfortunately, the timing wasn't right on the person who I had targeted for that position. When out of the blue, the two of us get caught on for me on a Sunday as I'm eating lunch with my son, and that's just the way you know, life happens. Number I didn't recognize, pick up the phone, and voila, it's somebody who we have both worked with, who brings a lot of good things to the table, is interested in coming coming on board, and you know, that conversation is still ongoing. I don't think that they originally thought, hey, the Asheville office is where they would be, but it would certainly qualify for what I'm looking for as far as a veteran's presence to round out that office like you have put together there in Charlotte. You know, I personally, you know, you guys are familiar with the King Law Way. If you're at all interested in the work that we do, my number one is purpose. You've got to be able to show a good purpose for what you're doing. Number two is the people. And as I start to see those people ones come into place, that makes a huge difference. And I do think I have some of the right people in place. I think the frustration is that, you know, when you have a purpose, it's very clear on your own. When you start bringing in people, you want them to connect with that purpose. But by nature, like a prism, they're going to break down that purpose and they're going to have their own thoughts, their own ideas, and those things. And I know that that's a little bit of what you're dealing with because you kind of started with some of the foundation pieces before we even started this up, and trying to take that prism of their own take on where that purpose is frustrating sometimes because it can be something like, okay, what do I need? You know, I think that when you're dealing with people, you want them to be a situation where, you know, I can sit down with Jeannie once and say, here's what my purpose is. Oh, I agree with that. And now I want to move on to the next problem, but that's not the way people work. You have to work on that person every day. And, you know, I think that, you know, the hats that the two of us are wearing oftentimes are very difficult for us to do. I mean, if you're talking about you got an appointment in Charlotte, that can feel like a win for you, but then suddenly you're back wearing your attorney hat. And that may not be the hat that you need to be wearing when it comes to the leadership at that Charlotte office, because, you know, there's no doubt that when things go down, you know, if you, and I don't mean down, just a trend of anything but up, an uptrend, anything that's not an uptrend, even this, that could be an uptrend, if it's not on the trajectory you want it to be in, the first impulse of an entrepreneur, and that's what I consider both of us going into this, that's what the Two Kings Challenge is about. You want to muscle that back yourself. You want to grab that, you want to grab a hold of that problem. You want to, you know, you don't have any problem stacking it up, but when something is about to fall, you want to be the one who jumps up to try to make sure that those pieces don't come tumbling down. And you know, I think that that's what leads me to number 3 on my King Law Way, and that's mistakes. Is that when you make a mistake, you should not consider that as being a setback, but like, okay, I see that I didn't offer that right for that person. You know, as I'm building my team, I should have done this. I should have coached us a little bit differently. Should have realized that this person needed some cheerleading, not some instruction. And you know, those are the kind of things that I think you're naturally good at, but it still goes against that base instinct of us of just like, I'm going to muscle this thing up myself.
Yeah, and I think that's a ton of good points, and a lot of what has really made us successful in a lot of the offices that we're in. And I think those principles do carry over, no matter what office that you're out of. There are some parts of this that, and when you bring it up that way, I think that's fitting too, and I think it's a good perspective on it. What I have found is for this challenge, right? We're competitive. This is our goals. This is what we want to work through. For this challenge, there are things that I know are necessary for Charlotte to get there, right? I mean, to be ahead of Asheville, to be making, this kind of money, there's a certain risk inherent in that, that is required to get to there, right? It's looking bigger than maybe, what any perspective or expectation might be for Charlotte. It may never even be realistic. But in order to get there, there are certain, when you talk about the people, there are certain pieces that would be required in that. When you talk about your Asheville group, you're now looking at a situation where you may have 3, 4 attorneys, the best case manager at the firm, all in this one office that has been established that's already bringing cases in. In Charlotte, we already have 2 attorneys that are kind of looking at each other, a lot. Not one of those is very busy, but it's not all Charlotte related, at least when they're there and not even there full time. So, to compete with that on a profit level, on an income level, it's going to require more of everything. And then, but that's much different than the King Law question of whether we need somebody else in this office or do we have enough people in this office. And I think that's probably the biggest part of my challenge moving forward. And maybe where you say, trying to hold those pieces together, it is difficult because I don't know what else, I don't know what else there is to do it other than that. But I think it's trusting in the right people, the people that we have, and having them, trying to get that vision at least to be shared. And maybe that means mine's a change, but at least to get on the same page with what that vision looks like. But I really think that the key is, how do I show that what is best for this challenge and growing Charlotte, without factoring in the other parts, is also what's best for the company overall, King Law collectively. And that's a challenge. And it, frankly, it may not be possible. Those 2 things may be different. But I think that if this thing gets to where I want it to be, I think answering that question is the key to it. And it's showing that there is the work there, and it's showing that these things are necessary, and it's showing that this growth trajectory is right. You can put on a paper, plenty of people do this. Hey, here's point A and here's our goal way up here, and we're just going to take a straight line right to it. And, that's all the parts that are there. But if you're starting, here, how do you convince everybody else, partnership group, management team, our junior partners, any of our attorneys that are in leadership, any of our, non-billable staff that's in management roles and accounting roles, how do you make them believe that this curve is going there? And I think the key to that is really, being able to show some of that and figuring out what that vision actually is, and then starting to see some development on it. And I think that's really what, the next couple weeks, the next month or so is about. And then I think if we get there, the rest of it may take care of itself. But I think that's, I think it's going to be some extra hours in that time, but I think you're right. I don't think it can be, hey, I'm just going to do this. Like, I'm going to go door to door in Charlotte or whatever. Some of that may be good, and I may do some of that. But all those parts fitting together, I don't know how sustainable long-term that is, as opposed to what may show some short-term positives.
One of the things I'd like for you to talk about, and it's something that we've alluded to in our personal discussions, but I don't think we've ever talked about it in this kind of level, um, Charlotte is our boardwalk. All right. Probably everybody's played a game of Monopoly before.
Mm.
And, we've got, we can put together a Monopoly board of our 15 locations at King Law. And we have very, very small offices with a very low population. And, we can move your way around the board. And one of the things I know, like when I played Monopoly with my kids as they were growing up before they got good enough to beat me all the time and things like that, shrewd, is that they they would love to go and buy Boardwalk, just so they could say that they owned it, and a little bit of like I got Boardwalk. And I think that that's a little bit the way some of our younger attorneys, staff members look at Charlotte is like, and what you just described is you want to show a vision of where we are and where we want to go. When you're showing that, saying like, look, that I want to really be able to vision that out. But I believe that you got the monopoly at boardwalk in front of you, and you're in a high rent district. And by the way, it is a beautiful office. If anybody is near the web and they want to take a look at our Charlotte office, it is beautiful. We went to a Hornets game, just walked across the street to go watch it on Friday night, and I thought that was a really good chance for us to, not just the two of us, but have John Kreitz, our other partner, take a look at some of the things you're working on there in Charlotte. But I think that sometimes our people feel like, hey, I'm no longer on St. Charles Place. This is not Tennessee Avenue anymore. I'm on Boardwalk. And instead of having to show people this vision of where you want to go, I think that there may be a little bit of a sense of I've arrived, or that everybody's like, oh, I want to get to Charlotte, not realizing that just like my kids, just owning Boardwalk without any hotels or anything else is almost a liability. If you've not built your infrastructure up, you're paying the high rent district, for not necessarily the reward. And people, so I think if you could just talk about what do you do when they've seen too much of the vision, maybe, or they can see too far into advance, and some of the things that you might be dealing with that in terms of putting that together there.
Well, and I think that's a part of this, and I'm not necessarily going to say that is the cause with any of our people specifically. Tom and Blake are both great. They're working through things. I really believe, they were telling me they're meeting with people, all the attorneys in the building this week in Charlotte, doing some things like that are definitely pushing in the right direction. I don't know that it's necessarily there, but I think the concept is exactly right, and the sort of fundamentals of it too. If we were to post, send a all user email and said, how many attorneys want to go to Charlotte? We'd probably get 4 or 5 current attorneys that would say, absolutely, I'd love to be in Charlotte for exactly the reasons that you just described. Luckily, one of the advantages of having somebody like Tom, who is more established, that's wanting to go there is, there may not be as much, the rose colored glasses are not, quite as colored as maybe somebody who has, less experience or more new to it. And they think, hey, this is the big city. This is where all the people are. There's so many people here. The cases are just going to funnel in. And I know that Tom is being hit with some of that, where we're getting the calls, but, they're not necessarily the type of people that can afford our services. So sure, there are people, but, it's how do we get the right piece of that pie, to move forward. But I think fundamentally, that's one of the real questions. And I love the Monopoly reference. That's the first time you've given that one to me. But, if you get the hotels, on Park Place and Boardwalk, then, it's still it's such a big gamble, but it could win the game instantly. It's one stop on one of those, and maybe it's ball game for everybody else, and they're having to mortgage everything, and you're rolling in it, or whatever. But you, it's really easy for you when you're using all your resources on a spot like that to have that, just that huge risk in other places. And I think that's where we do not have the ability to sink resources, financial resources into Boardwalk right now. I mean, it just like it's not that things are obviously it's not that things are bad or anything like that. We just don't have this stuff coming in, like the type of cases, like what we're getting in terms of feedback on those parts. We just don't have that to say, hey, we're going to throw the hotels up there, and we have enough, that we're sitting on to wait a while to see what happens and afford, some of that risk. Not that we couldn't afford some of that risk. I think Charlotte altogether is that type of risk. But just the fact that we're committed to an office there, for a lease period is the risk. And now it's where those other resources are going to come from. And I think that, it's going to involve some legwork and some groundwork, from these people who think, who some of that idea may be, oh yeah, this is Boardwalk and I've made it, and now everything else is going to take care of itself. Like I said, I'm lucky that that's not our attorney group that's there, but we do get a lot of that with people coming in, and that would be the type of person, I think, that maybe not exclusively, there's location based things, stuff like that, but in general, that's the type of person, the type of new law school grad that, is attracted to areas like Charlotte, and, to a lesser extent, Asheville too, but obviously it's much less, we're not even talking in the same scope in terms of the size of the community.
Yeah, I think on our monopoly, I don't know if Asheville would be a yellow or a green. It would be somewhere in that corner for us. Now, we're not necessarily dealing with the Atlantas, Houstons, and New York cities of the world. Our in terms of our monopoly board, I think it is fascinating because I think that we have done a pretty good job of learning how to make money on those early properties on the board. That's where a lot of our niche has been, and I think that's I don't want to strain that analogy too far, but I do think that a lot of our young attorneys are going to look at that Charlotte office and they're going to say like, hey, that's where I want to be. That's because so many of our attorneys are, and this is not particularly new over the last 20 years. I just think it's something that's talked about a little bit more, and that's just the blend between home and work life, and part of that's been the COVID times and those things, kind of things, and but the concept of like I want my life to be seamless with the rest of my with my work. And I think Charlotte provides a lot of that for our younger attorneys in a way that a Marion may not, or a Forest City may not feel that same way. And I think that that's a challenge for you because it's like, look, here's this influx of clientele that's coming into Charlotte because you have generated some interest. And while I want to be sensitive to the concept of access to judgment, to justice, that is really a pervasive problem in the practice of law. That there's a lot of, every one of those people need legal help, but we're trying to build something up, and you're trying to say, okay, what is the right match for that? For me in Asheville, the people are so important. Give an example. Like last week, I was ready, wanted to be able to announce Jeannie, but she wasn't quite ready to make that announcement. I think she made it later on in the day after we did this recording. But at either rate, she's only had about a week on the job. But yesterday, she had already scheduled her own meeting, day-long meeting, with all the people that have any association with Asheville. at any of our offices, and she started doing an inventory list of any cases that have been scattered across the landscape of our offices. If they had a direct relationship to Asheville, she pulled them in, and we have some A-class players that I think that anytime you get a group of professionals together, you're going to get some characters, and that's no different in law. We've got some characters, and a lot of them, practice law a lot of different ways. And Jeannie is a absolute by the book. She wrote the book for the King Law Way, and she roped them in. I didn't have anything to do with it. The only thing that she used me for was she CC'd my name on trying to rally the troops together, with the idea of, well, maybe if they can get Brian on board, or they can see that Brian is supporting this, it will make this thing happen. But primarily that is the diligence of Jeannie combined with the exuberance of Victoria really started to make that happen, and she's putting that together. And I think that that's one of the things that we love the sports analogies too. Is that you've got two superstar players. I mean, you've got in very different players in Blake and Tom. Tom, who certainly is one of our most experienced litigator, or at least is somebody who will not blink about going into a Charlotte courtroom. I don't think that's going to be an issue. And then Blake, who is probably one of the smartest people I've ever met. I mean, I think that he runs a chemical business as a hobby on the side. I'm not 100% sure about that. Frank, we got characters that there, but what you're trying to put together is that glue person who can, sort of like, okay, how do we take what's going on? I mean, you can give the vision, maybe like a coach or, from the sidelines, it's like, okay, here's what the vision is, and certainly Tom and Blake are absolutely understanding of what that vision might be. But right now, I don't think you have that glue person who's like, okay, every day, let's do this. Let me call the meeting. Let me do some of those things. And I think that that's been a challenge for you to try to put together that key person that's probably not an attorney, but is strong enough to be able to take these star players and be able to say, okay, it's great that we've got these two great players on the team, but we need somebody to be able to distribute the ball, somebody to be able to get them get the points in, whatever that might look like. So if you could put together your next hire for the Charlotte office, and you just were given a not a person description, but just sort of like what traits are you looking for, what skills you might be looking for, what would that be for you right now in the Charlotte office?
I think the main thing that I would say is, first off, a person who is, in the area, and who is going to be in the area is probably not the right way to describe it, but we need a regular schedule. There we need somebody who is available, in those hours of the day in the Charlotte office. The second thing that I would say for describing those traits would be, I really want this person to be, upper echelon social. I don't know exactly how to put that, to dig a little deeper with that, but I think this needs to be somebody who is okay with picking up the phone and calling some local businesses and some local attorneys and doing some of these kind of networking style things, going to some events, maybe that's something that they enjoy. They're just people who are it's hard to know. I mean, that's not an interview question necessarily, or at least everybody knows the right answer to it. I probably would. I could handle that question fine in an interview. But if you stick me at a social gathering with 100 people, you know, I may or may not branch outside of my bubble. So figuring out those type of people, I think, you know, that's harder to find maybe. But that's kind of what I think right now would make the most sense. And then, you know, we need an organizer too, I think. And, you know, that's three very hard ones, you know, or at least the last two are very hard to find in one person. But I think somebody that is, you know, going to be more consistent, going to be more, you know, here is where, you know, here's the schedule, you know, here is what's going to happen today. Here's what we're going to do tomorrow, which is something that I struggle with. And, you know, me and Tom have a lot of similarities in that way, I think, too. So it becomes a little bit more of a challenge with what we have right now to put these details down. You know, it's here's the ideas, let's put them into motion. And I think we need more of an implementer on that front in Charlotte as well.
Yeah, I'm a little different. I think what I'm needing is somebody to score points. I need a marquee player that because I think that what you just described is probably Victoria. You know,
I agree.
I don't know that we've ever had a team member that is more willing to just go out and meet new people and just seems to love it. I mean, that's just what she does. But you know, she's been practicing law for 1 year. She's a fantastic attorney. But you know, what I need is somebody to, when we go out and do those things, who can sell it and say, "Oh yeah, don't worry, your client is going to be taken care of if you make that referral, because look at this." And I think that it's interesting because both of us had resumes following the desk that fit, I think, that what we're looking for, but both of them have, you know, so like, okay, how do you know, because puzzle pieces don't come perfectly aligned in there. You have to sometimes say like, okay, what is it? Because, you know, I'm thinking of a resume that the two of us got this week that would probably fit a lot of the things that you are talking about for the Charlotte office. But, you know, there's a window of time. I mean, you know, that it's she's going to be a long-term member, but does she, you know, how do we make all this work when, you know, we're trying to establish not something for the 90-day game. I mean, we're trying to put this thing in perpetual motion to where at the end of this we can say like, okay, this is self-running. This is not only wins the competition, but something that a year from now we can just check in and say like, oh yeah, it's continued on, and look at what the growth is. And I, you know, I think that it is one of the things that I feel like that we've made mistakes with in the past is to be too caught up in the person and the personality, and not enough caught up into saying like, look, what does that position need to look like?
Yeah.
You know, and I think that that's it's just so difficult because every business has this, probably every sales, every real estate firm, every you know, regardless of what that is. But law is definitely a cult of personality. I mean, there is no doubt that you know, lawyers are you know, are very much oriented to like an artist or an athlete or something like that, where you're like, okay, this is a rare talent, we need to build around them. Where, you know, when you're really team building, you kind of say like, look, this is, you know, you know, this is what we got. And because, you know, we tend to be, and you know, one analogy that we constantly roll back to is that Moneyball format, is that, you know, we don't have an unlimited payroll. You know, just a spoiler alert, neither Frank nor I have a trust fund that we're given by our parents. My dad worked in a mill and my mom was a teacher assistant, which is essentially basically free labor for the state to take care of kids. And there was no money, there was no inheritance, there was no this is what it is in law. I mean, we've always been players to be able to say like, hey, we got to maximize every dollar. We got to have a return in each part of that investment. And I think that part of that is to be able to say like, okay, you know, I may not be able to get that one person who, is like, oh, we could probably name one or two attorneys in Charlotte that, oh, if we got that person, it would all be done. We could name it all. But you're talking about, somebody who, what the cost would be, what that would be, is just not what we've got. So we have to, just like Moneyball would say, you have to get that in the aggregate. You have to say like, okay, here's this great litigator. Now we need somebody to be able to sell the goods. We need to be able to do this. And if you do it in the aggregate, you can do it in a way that builds that infrastructure up to where, obviously you hope that some of those develop into that superstar Hall of Fame lawyer that's going to change the world. But that we're going to have to organically grow that. We're not going to be able to go get that in a book of business with them.
Yeah, and and it's sort of in reverse. It's very much the opposite kind of way that it has happened in Asheville. It's kind of like, hey, we got, here's the superstar piece, but we need to put something around them. Normally, if it wasn't for the draw of Charlotte, this would be like, akin to, I don't know, LeBron's next decision being, the worst team in the league, which may happen, I guess, if they draft his son or whatever, not to get on basketball talk. But that's sort of what we have. And then it's sort of, how do you then figure out the pieces around it? And you have people that are gravitating to that, the office, the concept that we have this person that we can learn from and do some of those things. And a lot of people are interested in that, but then it's figuring out, who are the right people and to put around. And then unfortunately right now, well, I say unfortunately, I think it's, we expected this, but Tom is still spending a great deal of time in Forest City, which is very far away from Charlotte, very much like I'm in Marion today, I'm going to be in Charlotte tomorrow, which is, I don't know, 2 hours and 15 minutes away from each other, that's the kind of like scope that we're dealing with. And that's very similar to what Tom's dealing with also. So he's in two very, and the courthouses couldn't be much different either, which is the same in Rutherfordton too. So it is two different worlds that he's living in right now. And some of that's not on him, that's just the nature of it. And we've circled July 1 as the day, that he's going to be there full time. But the question is, how on July 1 do we already have this to a place to where not only can it support Tom, not only can it support Blake, but it's, we have a profitable case manager. We have a, new, possibly another attorney position that would come in at that point. So those are the things, and I know we're getting to the end of our time here too. But that's kind of, I think, what this is about in the next little bit of time is going to be about developing too. And I know it took all the week, but it felt like, the tide completely turned on us over the last week. And I have a feeling it may not be the last time. But some promising things. We both got an interesting email yesterday that could be a help in the Charlotte office that we may flesh out a little more over the next week. And, I'm look, if you'd asked me at the first of this week, I was really down on it. But I have kind of had a renewed sense of excitement about it again. So I think, I think we're not out of the fight yet, and we'll see what takes place over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, I mean, every day, like I said, it's so hard because there's the mood, and then there's the little things that just hits. I mean, last night, out of the blue, I got an email, and I think I forwarded it to you from one of our attorneys that just said like, hey, here's some options on good locations in Asheville, and I did a little breakdown on that. I'm not sure that they weren't terrible, but at the same time, there is you get little bits, and when you're surrounded by a really good team, and people are like, hey, what about this idea? What about that idea? And it does kind of inspire you to realize, like, you don't just when you have a down day or you have a day that's like frustrating, to have such an awesome team like we're surrounded by, where people are like, hey, here's this idea. Hey, TikTok. Oh yeah, I've got a great idea for TikTok. And there's there is sort of those things that makes it a little bit easier to practice law. So yeah, this is I don't know that this is as a concrete of a talk today as it is just like, okay, let's gravitate to the idea of like what got us cranked up into this, what's going to keep us pushing through this. And I think that anybody that goes through business, I hope that what you're picking up is that there's going to be a grind, and it probably is right there at the month mark where you're like, okay, the that adrenaline burn starts to even you want concrete results, and concrete results, they come quickly, but they also, before they come, it's always a question. So I'd love to reach into the future and be able to talk to ourselves in 2 months to see where some of this stuff is going to be. And I hope that we can kind of take that process, because I was able to watch our very first episode, and it is interesting to go back and see this development. I hope that anybody who's listening to this gets that same level.
Yeah, I think that's where we are, especially for me, and we'll see what happens next week. And I'm going to embrace the grind. Maybe as Mr. Cardone would say, I'm going to 10x the grind, and we'll see what happens with it.
All right. Sounds good. See you next week.